Hello and welcome to All Villa, No Filler, a podcast all about Aston Villa, the world's greatest football team. If you're watching along on YouTube, please do subscribe, please do like, and please comment. And if you're listening on audio, please give us a 5-star review. If you like what we do, it really helps. Now, this is a special series where we're going to follow along with the history of our mighty football club. It's partly inspired by another Aston Villa fan, Tom Holland, and the incredible podcast he runs with Dominic Sandbrook. The rest is history. This is the first episode. In it, we follow Villa from 1874 to when we founded the league itself, all the way through our glory years to when that dark shadow spread across the world in 1939. There will be more to come from us in future about all this. But to start off, please do forgive my poor attempt at a Scottish accent. Every year, it's becoming more and more difficult for football clubs of any standing to meet their friendly engagements and even arrange friendly matches. The consequence is that at the last moment, through cup tie interference, clubs are compelled to take on teams who will not attract the public. I beg to tender the following suggestion as a means of getting over the difficulty: that 10 or 12 of the most prominent clubs in England combine to arrange home and away fixtures each season. The said fixtures to be arranged at a friendly conference about the same time as the international conference. My object in writing to you at present is merely to draw your attention to the subject and to suggest a friendly conference to discuss the matter more fully. I would take it as a favour if you would kindly think the matter over and make whatever suggestions you deem necessary. I'm only writing to the following: Blackburn Rovers, Bolton Wanderers, Preston North End, West Bromwich Albion and Aston Villa, and would like to hear what other clubs you would suggest. I am yours very truly, William McGregor.
Stirring stuff there. That was, of course, William McGregor. That wasn't Billy Connolly in the film Mrs. Brown. I understand some of our listeners might confuse the two. That was impressively read by Frankie Maguire of the All Villa No Filler podcast. Fantastic stuff. Stirring stuff and historic stuff, Frankie, because that was William McGregor, who was a committee member of Aston Villa in the 1880s, writing to other clubs around England, predominantly the Midlands and north of England, to set up the first ever football league.
Yes.
It just goes to show how historic we are, Frankie, as a football club. We always talk about it on this show, on this podcast, how historic Aston Villa are, but that really sets us, doesn't it, in the hearts of everything, really.
It really does. It really does.
Association football.
It does, and I think I tried to channel my inner William Wallace there. I imagined William McGregor's William Wallace, or maybe Al McAnally, Bosco Balabuan. You should say him.
Well, we've got, I mean, from William McGregor to John McGinn, we've got
Andy Gray.
Andy Gray. We have a storied history of Scotsmen at Aston Villa
McCormack.
Football Club. Ross McCormack. Yes.
McGates weren't working.
It's what working, man. So it was, we have an incredible history of Scotsmen playing for Aston Villa, being involved with the club.
Yeah.
Started, of course, as you say, with William McGregor. And so what we thought during the off season, as Americans call it, as we wait for the new season to begin, we would do a serialized history of our great football club, Aston Villa FC, starting with the period at the very beginning, Frankie, 1874 through to 1939, because I imagine, a lot of our listeners, they probably do know the history of the club. Mm-hmm. But perhaps there are other little details that they might not be aware of, and hopefully I'm here to fill in any sort of gaps that exist in their knowledge.
And we should say as well, we are fully inspired by renowned Aston Villa fan Tom Holland from The Rest is History. This is a sort of tribute to him. He's a Villa fan. He's and he has inspired our efforts here. But we might.
I mean, it's amazing that he hasn't decided to do Aston Villa on The Rest is History as such a big Villa fan that he is.
Yeah,
he hasn't convinced Dominic Sandbrook to do one about Aston Villa, but that doesn't matter because we are here to fill in.
Yes,
fill in that gap.
Gaps. Yeah,
we're here to fill the gaps. So, are you ready? Are you sat comfortably?
I'm absolutely. I'm very excited because I think I have a decent understanding of Villa's history, but I think there's going to be a lot I'm going to find out here of things that I really had no clue about. And
Yeah.
maybe I think me and the listeners, you may give us a better appreciation of just how important Villa are and actually how successful we have been over time. I know more recently we haven't been, but why we are such a
Spoiler alert. The time period that I'm going to refer to now is the most successful we have ever been.
the 90s.
It really tails off. It really does tail off quite soon into the 20th century, but we will get into
We
all that
we were the
in
team of the 90s, the 1890s, but
the
the 90s.
1890s.
Yeah.
The 1890s. That was our decade for sure. So, as all good stories begin, Frankie, the history of Aston Villa Football Club starts with four men hanging around a gas lamp in Handsworth.
Mm.
That is where all the good stories start, of course, in Handsworth around a gas lamp. So these four men, their names are Jack Hughes, Frederick Matthews, William Scattergood, and Walter Price. These are the original Fab Four.
Right. Yeah.
Forget the Beatles.
Oh yeah.
These are the four guys you want to be hanging around with. These are the cool kids
Yeah.
of
Sure.
1870s Birmingham.
The better legacy as well. Yeah.
Better legacy,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, of course, these days, if you're hanging around a gas lamp in Handsworth, you'd be done for loitering. But in the 1870s, this was seen as a pretty standard way to establish a football club. So that's what they were doing. So basically, what was going on at this time was uh, they needed something to do in the winter months, the cold, harsh winter months in Birmingham, because they would play cricket in the summer and they were thinking, what are we going to do? This is pre-TikTok. This is pre-Netflix. We've got to do something to fill our time, basically. So this being the Victorian age, of course, if you're not playing football, you're sweeping chimneys or you're dying of cholera. Essentially, these are the two things that you're doing aside from playing football.
Yeah.
So the four men that I mentioned, Ringo, John, Paul, and George, they're members of the adult Bible class at the Villa Cross Wesleyan Chapel.
Right.
Wesleyanism it's a branch of Christianity where they worship the former Villa striker Wesley, of course.
Yeah.
Even during his Club Bruges days, they were all over him.
Yeah.
So they've been following him through thick and thin since the 1870s.
Yeah.
So
Ben Mee is the
decided
Antichrist.
yeah. So they get things up and running. This is 1874, and their first ever football match is against Aston Brook St Mary's rugby team. And as a condition of that game, Frankie, this being the 1870s where all bets are off, the first half had to be played with rugby rules.
Mm-hmm.
So think Steven Gerrard tactics here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
First half is rugby rules, and then the second half is association football rules.
Right.
Unai
Emery turned up.
Unai Emery turned up to save the day after the 45th minute. So Villa win 1-0, 100% record, 1 from 1. We should really fold the club there. It's not going to get any better than that. But they keep going. So fast forward 5 years now, we're into the late 1870s and 1880s. Villa, they're up and running. And, enter stage right, George Ramsay comes into the picture. Jacob's dad. And he's the club secretary, and he's the first person who enters Villa into the FA Cup. So at this time, this is the pre-league structure. So Villa are essentially playing a bunch of friendlies, and the FA Cup is formed, which it precedes the league system. So Villa enter the FA Cup for the first time. In the first round, they beat Stafford Road, the mighty Stafford Road, of course.
So
and then get this, Frankie. After drawing Oxford University in the next round, they decide to withdraw from the competition because they think Oxford Uni are too good.
Right.
So basically, they feel they're too good to beat. So we just throw in the towel.
Yeah.
And I mean, imagine doing that nowadays, Frankie. Like you draw you draw Man City in the FA Cup these days. You're just like, I'll just give it to them.
To be fair, there have been games in recent times where I've felt like that. Like when Villa first came back up, I was like, no, don't turn up. Let's just don't bother. Let's focus on next week.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know how we talk about these days. Focus on the league and stuff. I mean, this is basically what they're doing. But 120 odd years ago.
Yeah.
So
they wouldn't be the first people to feel a little bit inferior when they're around Oxbridge types, would they? Like, no.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So, quite an embarrassing start to our involvement in cup competitions, I'll be honest. So we're off and running. We're playing in these friendlies. We're playing in the FA Cup. We're deciding to withdraw ourselves from cup competitions. This is all happening. Um, so yeah, so we sort of we improve here,
Hmm.
and we think, you know what, we're going to give a proper run in the FA Cup, and we actually win the FA Cup, Frankie, for the first time in 1887. We beat West Brom. Jed Steer's there. He's giving them the eyes. He's putting them off, and we pick up our first cup win in
Yeah.
1887.
Start as we mean to go on,
Starters we need
dominating
to
them.
starters we need to go on. So we're starting to pick up results, and we're starting to look like quite an important team already. And as we alluded to at the start of the podcast, Frankie, things start to get serious when the Villa committee member William McGregor, as you say, he says it's all well and good playing these college kids and withdrawing from cup competitions, but let's start a structured competition. So in 1888, the first football league is played. Villa, along with 11 other clubs, some of them you mentioned in the letter at the start of the show, play in it. Preston are the first winners, incredibly.
Mm.
Villa are runners up, which, seeing as we were the ones that sort of started the ball rolling, it's a bit unfortunate that we didn't win the first one. Do you
Yeah,
think?
yeah, quite annoying.
It is quite annoying. But basically, that just kind of pisses us off, really, because we then go on to dominate for the next decade.
Yeah.
So we win 5 league titles, 2 more FA Cups. We're essentially the Man City of the 1890s, but instead of oil money, we're sort of funded by church donations. It's a different
It's-
vibe.
yeah.
That's what we're rolling on, church
Yeah.
donations, and it's seeing us through. We are the preeminent side of the late 19th century.
Mhm.
So through the early years of the 20th century, we remain a pretty successful club. We win 2 more FA Cups in 1905 and 1913, and the league again in 1910. Players, they're still looking fantastic. They got mustaches you could land a biplane on. Things are all looking good in the Aston Villa garden. All is rosy.
Mm.
The important thing to mention at this point, it all goes to crap when the First World War breaks out, amongst many other things which are not going so well.
That was definitely the worst thing that happened in those years, wasn't it?
Yeah, it puts into context really. So 1914, the First World War breaks out. A lot of Villa players go off to fight. Most notably is Harry Hampton. He is a player that is Villa's record league goal scorer. Do you know how many goals he
I
scored?
don't actually know.
So 215 goals in 339 games, which
Wow.
is very
Bloody
impressive. Ollie
hell.
Watkins has
Yeah.
got a bit of catching up to do with
That's
that
sort
one, I
of
think.
oh, that's he must have been one of the first players in world football ever to have got those sorts of numbers in all of football. He has to have been one of the first. Like,
Yeah, and yet incredibly, he only won 4 international caps. I assume Gareth Southgate was still England manager at this
yeah,
point. He is not calling up Villa players even
yeah.
then.
His,
So
his
four
vendetta
caps,
against the Villa.
yeah, 4 caps for a player that scored 215 goals in 200, 339 games. So what's that as an average?
How much was it? It was in it was 200.
215 goals in 339 games.
Oh, it's got to be about 1 in 3 that, or or 2 in 3 almost. Yeah,
Yeah,
roughly
yeah.
about that. It's close to
Anyway,
that.
I mean, he's banging them in for Villa, sort of
Yeah.
pre-war and leading up to the First World War. All well and good, but instead of playing international football, he is serving internationally on the Somme at this point, and yeah, he's actually gassed.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
he suffers during a gas attack, and that, as you can imagine, really curtails his footballing career.
Oh
He does
dear.
come back and play. I think he goes on to play for Birmingham City, actually, after leaving
Oh
Villa after
God.
the war. But it doesn't really continue as it had done for him um, pre-war.
Mhm.
Um, so there we are, Harry Hampton. But anyway, back to the Villa. When the war finishes in 1918, the war's over. But like Britain at this time, Villa enters this period of slow decline. So gone are these
Mhm.
relentless title wins of the 1890s. Villa are going full Martin O'Neill, and they're finishing sixth, fifth, sixth in the league. So
Mhm.
still, decent, but not obviously challenging for the title. We're basically like a Europa League club at this point.
And
The
and I,
Europa
sup-
League anthem is booming around Villa
I
Park.
suppose around this time as well, with the founding clubs that there were very few of them. From around, I'd say the late 1800s to early 1900s onwards, you're starting to get, Arsenal Woolwich Arsenal have turned up.
Yeah,
Newton. What was
it's
Manchester United
It's
called?
the Herbert Chapman years. He's
Yeah.
his famous manager who managed Arsenal. Then he goes on to Huddersfield,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they're like basically all these clubs are changing their tactics
Right.
as well. I think what's going on with the Villa at the moment is we are very much stuck in our ways tactically,
Yeah.
and we're not really catching up to what's going on. As I say, particularly with managers like Herbert Chapman who are changing formations, they're changing
Mm,
personnel, they're doing things differently, and it's obviously being very successful, whereas we are not really doing that.
yeah.
I think we're still like, as clubs often do. I mean, you could look at Man United nowadays; it would be a kind of a slightly modern comparison. We're still living off the back of success of 20 years ago, 10
Mm,
years ago, and we're not really looking to the future particularly. So
yeah.
we're starting to slip back. Um, we do win the FA Cup again in 1920, and we reach the final again in 1924, which we lose to Newcastle. Um, and we've got another player who's banging them in at this stage. He's called Billy Walker, and he scores 244 goals in 531 games. So his ratio is not as impressive as Harry Hampton,
Yeah.
but he scores more goals.
But
So he is. So
Jamie
Billy
Vardy numbers.
JP Vardy numbers.
Yeah.
Billy Walker is still our all-time record goal scorer in both league and cup competitions.
Yeah.
So he's doing this in the 1920s and early 30s. So he's there for the 531 games. So he's there for quite a long time. And he's pretty consistent. And I think if it wasn't for him, we would be struggling more than we ended up doing.
Hmm.
So in the 20s, as I say, we're still doing all right. Not as good, but okay.
It's not quite the roaring 20s, is it? It's
Not quite the roaring 20s. Um, we're not doing the Charleston of Villa Park really at
yeah.
this stage. And then at the end of the 20s and early 30s, this is where things really start to hit the fan, Frankie.
Oh,
1929.
everywhere, everywhere. It's
Yeah. 90, I'm going to put it into some social historical context here. 1929, Wall Street crash.
yeah.
Villa are sinking too. The global economy is tanking, and in that year we finished 13th, and it sort of paves the way for the hangover, which is the 1930s. Um, Now the thing about 1930s is it actually starts off okay. We've got another player who's scoring an unbelievable amount of goals. He has one season. He's got the most 1930s name imaginable. I think
Right.
you might know him. Do you know the name I'm going to say?
Pongo. Pongo
Pongo
wearing.
Waring.
Pongo
That's
wearing.
right.
Yeah.
Pongo Waring. So Pongo Waring in the 1930-31 season scores 49 goals in 39 games. So he is Lionel Messi, Haaland, Ronaldo,
yeah.
all rolled into one for that one season. Um, and with him leading the line, we score an incredible 128 goals. So he
Wow.
scores like kind of half of them. The other team is pitching in. The problem is, Frankie, we are leaking them like a sieve.
Right.
So we concede 84 goals. So we're like Kevin Keegan's Newcastle. We are the great entertainers of the early 30s, but it's not doing us any favors.
Right. Yeah.
We're scoring lots, conceding lots. Um, so yeah, we're burning brightly, and then we implode like a supernova. So things start going wrong in 1933. Billy Walker, the man who's scoring all the goals,
Yeah.
as well
Things
as Pongo
really did
Waring.
go wrong in 1933 in many, many ways.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
not a good year. It's
No.
not a good year for Villa. It's
Really
not a good
bad
year
year.
for Western Europe
No.
at this stage. Billy Walker retires.
Right.
Hitler becomes chancellor. So,
Yeah.
the two,
It's just, yeah.
it's all going wrong.
Imagine being a Villa fan back then. You'd be like, oh, Billy Walker's retired. And that Hitler's one off. Oh, God,
Yeah,
this is
yeah. It's just
terrible.
you are pulling your hair out. Villa are
Yeah.
finishing sort of 15th now. So we're
Yeah.
really starting to think, we were finishing, as I said, 5th, 6th in the league. We're now sinking down to like 13th, 15th. It feels ominous. It feels like it did in the build up to the 15-16 season. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We're circling the drain here.
You can fit it's
It's
coming.
coming.
Yeah.
It's coming. We're circling the drain. Um, so the 20th century equivalent of the 15-16 season is 1935-36. We stunk up the first division, Frankie. We had the worst defensive record in top flight history up to that
Wow.
point.
Wow.
We conceded 110 goals over the course of that season. Defeats include a 7-0 loss to Arsenal, a 7-2 defeat to Grimsby, Grimsby,
Jeez.
Frankie.
Wow. Their biggest ever win, probably.
Yeah, I think we conceded another 7 goals to Blackburn. I think we lose 12 games by 4 goals or more
Jeez.
over the course of that season.
This,
It's horrendous. I mean,
this
we're
is,
lucky that this wasn't committed to. I mean, maybe it was committed to film. British Pathé probably have something about this somewhere,
yeah.
but this is awful stuff. Pongo Waring is tweeting out pictures of his Lamborghini. Um, it's DEFCON 1, Frankie.
Yeah, it's got, yeah.
The red button's been pushed. Um, so we're relegated for the first time. This is the first time in Villa's storied history that we go down. And
Wow.
this is awful because we are the founders of the Football League. As I said, people are still thinking of Villa probably as United are now. I guess it would be similar to United going down now,
Yeah.
really.
River Plate going down in Argentina like 10,
River
11
Plate going
years
down,
ago.
Hamburg
Yeah.
being relegated in Germany.
Yeah.
These are kind of like a massive name, founders of the Football League,
Yeah.
historically very successful. In living memory, had obviously done all these things in the late 19th, early 20th century, and now they've been relegated in the 30s.
Yeah.
This is awful
And
stuff.
it is like, when United went down in 75 or something, Dennis Law scored that for Man City, didn't he? That back heel and then didn't celebrate the
Yeah.
original apology celebration.
Yeah,
And that
exactly.
was
Yeah.
shortly after the Busby Babes. It can happen to clubs, can't it? When
It can
maybe
happen to
when you
clubs.
just
Yeah.
lose that big talismanic character who leads you, and they just can't find their way after sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And you sort of rest on your laurels a little bit. I think if you've had a lot of success in the past, you sort of think that's always guaranteed to come. But
Yeah,
as we can see now and historically with Villa, it's not how it works out. But Frankie, like a phoenix from the ashes, Villa do rise again. They consolidate in Division Two and they bring in a new manager. His name's Jimmy Hogan,
yes,
Scott Hogan's dad.
yeah.
And so he
Fascinating character, Jimmy Hogan. Really,
very,
really interesting character.
very interesting. Now, I don't know how much you know about him, Frankie, but he is one of those kind of like revolutionary coaches.
Yes.
This is kind of actually before he really makes his name. So this is in the 1930s, but it's in the 50s where he's makes his name. So he is basically um, shapes the legendary Hungary
The
team,
magical Magyars.
the
Yes.
Magyar, so Puskás and the rest of that. So he is behind their rise to dominance in international football in the 1950s. So this is where he's kind of like sort of starting it all really, and as Villa coach in the 1930s. So under him, Villa finished fifth in their first season in Division Two. That's not enough to go up, but it's enough to kind of give them a bit of confidence going into the following season, where they do go up. They finish second in the 37-38 season, I think.
Mhm.
So balance has been restored to the Force, Frankie. Luke Skywalker's happy. The Ewoks are happy. Villa
Yeah.
are back in the first division, where they belong. But as soon as they start to reestablish themselves as a force once again, Germany invades Poland.
Oh God.
So
This is particularly
once
sore
again,
subject for you with your Polish ancestry as well.
absolutely, this is terrible for me. So this is it's an awful thing.
What is it? What is it with these global events getting in the way when Aston Villa are just about to get good again?
I know.
What worries
Yeah.
me about now, actually, now I'm like, oh God,
Yeah.
we look like we're getting good. So Russia's going to invade England or something now, in the next 2 years. But oh, great! Just as Villa are about to win the title, and then yeah,
I know. Could we see history repeat itself, Frankie? We don't know. So,
hopefully not.
Hitler, he's clearly a blue nose. He is trying to stamp out this Villa resurgence by any means necessary. And that's it, up to 1939. So, Frankie, it's a roller coaster of history from start to the 1930s. But a very interesting part in our history. How do you sort of evaluate that sort of portion of Villa's history? Starts off
Yeah,
well. I mean, it starts off well, and I mean, it's not really a roller coaster, is it? It kind of just sort of does that, right? Would you
yeah.
say?
I think it's really fascinating because we obviously a lot of the things you see with trends in football, sometimes like I just mentioned, when Manchester United went down in the 70s and, Man United ongoing struggles now. And both of those occasions were after they lost really talismanic managers, Matt Busby in the 70s,
Yeah,
then Alex Ferguson in 2013. And sometimes clubs can really struggle to replace that, which is what was so impressive about what Liverpool did under Arne Slot with, Jurgen Klopp leaving. But Aston Villa, obviously, George Ramsay really was the very first great manager of
Yeah,
football. You could argue.
definitely.
Maybe there's some others I don't know about, but you look at what he won throughout the 1890s into the early 1900s and how he established Aston Villa as the preeminent force in football. And sort of the way he was able to sort of prolong that period as well. He was probably the first truly great manager, and Villa's sort of drifting off after that. Obviously, World War One obviously makes a big difference. But you can see that when you lose those big managers, sometimes even back then, it's just very difficult to replace that when you lose a character like that. And also how world events can impact you, or just events that happen to clubs can impact you. Aston Villa, obviously World War One was an impact, World War Two as well, as it was for all clubs really. But you look at like Torino when they had an absolutely tragic plane crash
Yeah.
what was it, in the 40s, 50s, lost pretty much all their team, and Torino at that point were the preeminent team in Italy, or were close to it. And Torino have never been the same since. I mean, they've always been a key team in Italy, but they've never been up there with Milan's and Juventus and Napoli and other sides like that. So yeah, it's just really fascinating to see that Aston Villa sort of experienced some of these things at first, and then also as in the early years how few teams there were competing really.
Yeah.
And just you can see that, all right, as it's starting to get more competitive, then it's, Villa maybe go from first down to fourth, fifth, and maybe didn't react brilliantly to that. The emergence of the Manchester Uniteds, the Arsenals,
Yeah.
the Liverpools. And
Well, as I said, a lot of the clubs to begin with, they are primarily based in northern working class towns. So
yeah, right.
all of the clubs in the founding league were in the Midlands and the North. So Stoke, Preston, West Brom, Wolves, Derby, Accrington, us. So yeah, I mean, as you say, then you're starting to get the spread of popularity of football traveling south, the emergence of as you say, these new clubs with new ways of thinking, fresh ways of thinking,
Yeah.
new ways of coaching, and yeah, as you say, like they're sort of usurping Villa, and Villa are sort of dropping down the table. But I suppose as well, because we were so successful at the very beginnings of the Football League and beginnings of kind of like football itself, one of the earliest clubs to be formed in the 1870s, our influence early on was quite pronounced. So Burnley changed their kits in 1910 to claret and blue
Hmm.
to kind of basically attempt to emulate the dominance of Villa at the
Oh,
time,
wow.
because
Right.
Villa was seen as kind of like as you say, the preeminent club. Burnley changed their kits. West Ham, I think they received Villa kits
Yes. Yeah, I think yeah.
to play in, but obviously, perhaps the reason why the kits were claimed was because Villa were the number one team at the time, and they were kind of like seen as the popular kit to have, or the
Hmm.
style to have. So like, the influence of us at that stage has affected the emergence of clubs after us in
Yeah.
terms of kind of like certainly the kits and stuff. So
And
yeah, it is.
claret and blue does feel like a very Victorian color, doesn't it? It does. It feels of its time, and
Yeah.
that's a pretty cool legacy to have. Like, I think even our colors that reflect the fashions, and even if you just go in old Victorian buildings and see sometimes the wallpaper, can be like a deep burgundy or a claret, and
Mm.
you don't, most modern clubs don't tend to have claret and blue. It's got an unusual color now, actually. Um, so that in itself is quite interesting. Um, yeah, it's fascinating you brought up Jimmy Hogan as well. I was really glad you did, because he's always been someone I've been really interested in ever since I read Jonathan Wilson's brilliant book, Inverting the Pyramid.
Yeah, yeah.
Read that many years ago, and Jimmy Hogan's a really interesting character because from what I remember from the book, he was always a little bit of an outsider. So
Right.
he
Yeah.
was he had Irish parents or something, and so I think but he was born and grew up in England, I think. I might be wrong about that, but
Yeah.
I
No, he
think he
was.
was.
He was born in
Um,
England. Yeah.
so he sort of always felt a little bit like an outsider, a little bit, and he tried to introduce a passing style into English football in something like the 1915, that's those sorts of years. The
Yeah.
English football at the time was very, very set in its ways. It was much more about physicality, kicking it hard,
Very direct, yeah.
kicking shins, the
Yeah.
kick and rush, that was
Yeah,
what the
yeah.
ideology was. And England, over the years, it didn't refuse to take part in the World Cup, the first World Cup in, I think, 1932, which was in South America. I think then in Italy as well, 1936, didn't want to do any of that. So England kind of had a slight, superiority, I think, in feeling we invented the game and we therefore just know it better than everybody else. And the thing is, Jimmy Hogan, when he felt that his approach to football was not being accepted, he went off to Hungary. He went around Europe. He went to Hungary, introduced this new passing style, and in 1953, I want to say the year was, just off the top of my head, that was when the magical Magyars, Puskás, all these, they all turned up at Wembley, and England was not ready for what happened. England again had at this point maintained an arrogance that had sort of kept away from, not really bothered to, compete in international competitions or anything. Hungary turned up and played this passing game and beat England 6-3, which was, at the time, I think England were unbeaten at Wembley, had never lost, so they had a right to sort of feel superior. And that was just a real moment of it all coming back round, where they rejected this guy many, many years before. In he came with this new coaching philosophy to Hungary. Hungary turn up and play the game that he wanted to introduce and essentially teaches that England team a lesson. And England then had to adapt over the years, and that led to 1966, where they went and won the World Cup. But it's just really, really interesting how, how Jimmy Hogan, he ended up at Aston Villa, having been in Europe for a long, long time. And I think is one of the most interesting characters.
We played football as Jimmy Hogan taught us. When our football history is told, his name should be written in gold letters. So they obviously hold him in very high esteem.
Is that what Hungary said?
That is what Hungarian coach Gustav Sebes said after Hungary beat England in 53.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely, they held him in very high regard. And but yeah, obviously he was at Villa 20 years before that, so he was still probably like cutting his teeth. But spent a lot of his time, as you say, in abroad on mainland Europe, and certainly his philosophy or his style of play was adopted by clubs overseas. I think like Bayern Munich and clubs in Austria as well. So yeah, very influential coach.
Absolutely fascinating character he is. He was like the original.
He was the Emery of
1930s. He was one of the very first kind of footballers had characters who've changed the game. Pep Guardiola in 2008 with Barcelona, you would say. Johan Cruyff with his Barcelona in the Netherlands in the 70s. Like, football, every now and again, goes through a revolutionary phase. And Jimmy Hogan, you could argue, was maybe the first person to do that. And just very interesting. And again, you look even to this day where England can be quite slow to react to the changing philosophies of football. And all the way when we grew up, it was still quite kick and rush. And it's only really since these top coaches have come into England since about 2000 and, since maybe Mourinho, Benitez started coming in, Arsene Wenger, you could say the English football has started to adapt. And now you see much more technical players coming through. So it's, I just really think that's really cool that Jimmy Hogan was a big part of Aston Villa in the early days.
Yeah, absolutely. No, very good. It's just a shame that we persisted with the kick and rush for about 15 years before we decided to think, you know what? Probably not working out.
Every time we kick the ball forward, we'd lose it.
We just lost 7-2 to Grimsby. Should we change the way we play? No, let's just stick with it. Stick with it.
Keep going.
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
So there we are, Aston Villa from 1874 through to 1939. The plan is to talk a bit more about Villa then through the early 40s to probably 82, I guess, and then do another one from 82 until the present day, I think is my plan.
Let's do it.
So hopefully it's been enlightening, interesting to know about these characters, your Billy Walkers and your Harry Hamptons, your Pongo Warings.
Yeah, Pongo Warings as well, yeah. Pongo Warings, it's just such a memorable name, isn't it?
It is something like from, trying to think of a novelist from the 20s or the 30s.
Yeah.
Like F. Scott Fitzgerald book.
Yeah.
You
can see him hanging out with J.R. Tolkien, who was in Birmingham at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So there we are. Aston Villa, a history.